everybody, and welcome back to Base Paths and Brewskis. This is episode 4, and it is my part 2 of the 4-part projection series for the 2024 opening day roster. And today we'll be touching on the bullpen. The BP today is going to be an A&W root beer. Again, I will not be drinking alcohol until Easter. Gave it up for Lent, so today we'll be rocking with the root beer. I'm looking to start doing non-alcoholic beers coming up in the next pod. So if you have any suggestions for that, I'd love to hear them. Gonna try and go look into some and can't wait to see what I find. So moving on, let's start the episode with the bullpen that I project. So uh all in all, the guys I came up with are Devin Williams, Abner Uribe, Yoel Payamps, Hobie Milner, Elvis Paguero, Trevor McGill, Bryce Wilson, and Joe Ross. I think personally think this is going to be one of the best groups that the Brewers will have in terms of position groups, at least the most consistent, in my opinion. I think the infield has a chance to be good. I think the outfield has an even better chance to be good. But I think that consistently this will be the group that we can lean back on most. And I think we just have so many different unique skill sets and talents, and a lot of the guys that I like as well aren't even on this list, and we'll kind of touch on them a little later. But let's get into diving into each player individually. We're going to start with the best in the nation. That's Devin Williams. He's the GOAT. Two-time reliever of the year, rookie of the year. I believe that was in 2020, so don't know how that counts. But, you know, 2020 or not, still reliever of the year. He's 29 currently. He's a free agent through until 2026. I believe we extended him, so he is under contract. No more arbitration hearings. He is a 99th percentile pitcher in off-speed run value at 14 run value. That's that's really good for off-speed stuff. I mean, his changeup, that airbender, to me personally, I believe is the best pitch in baseball, thrown by a pitcher. So I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. His 2023 stats are as follows: a 1.53 ERA, 0.92 WHIP, 36 saves, a 282 ERA plus, a 282 ERA plus. Sorry, that one just deserves to be said twice because that is insane considering any plus stats like that, or even minus, start at 100 as the average. So anything above 100 is above average. For a plus stat, at least if it's minus, wants to be lower, I believe. But a 282 is pretty insane at 13.3 Ks per 9, 1.8 F4, 2.66 FIP, and a 58.2 innings pitched. Everything is elite besides, to me, the innings pitched. I think he could have thrown more. I think that relievers oftentimes, especially these closers, are saved for the save opportunities. A little repetitive there, but I mean, with 36 saves, that's a great number, but I think there are so many other times that he could have pitched and could have been used in high leverage situations, and he was kind of saved for later in the game if there was a potential save opportunity, and then there were some times where he just didn't get used. So to me, use your best pitchers in your highest leverage situations when coming out of the bullpen. And I'll give it credit. A lot of the times it is in the ninth inning when, it's a 1, 2, 3 run game. So a save opportunity. And obviously you want to save that guy for then. But if it's the eighth inning and it's a tie game, at that point in the game, that's the most important, time to put in your best reliever. So that's just my personal philosophy on it. We'll see what Pat Murphy does with that. He seems to be a guy more open to, having less defined inning roles for guys. And I think that is the most efficient way to use your bullpen. And so we'll see what he ends up doing with that. But I think that we need to see Devin Williams at least with 60 innings pitched. I'd like to see, 70, 80 potentially. I think he's a guy who needs to be out there every other day at least. So his ZiPS projection was a 3 ERA, 3.41 FIP, a 1.3 WAR, 29 saves, and 66 innings pitched, which is closer to what I kind of would like to see from him. Realistically, really 60 to 75, I guess I should say, is probably what I'd like to see from him. But the thing with him is he tends to throw a lot of pitches in his outings. not the most efficient sometimes, but he does strike a lot of guys out. So, I mean, that's kind of the trade-off you're going to get with a lot of strikeouts is longer at bats. So, um, I guess I can see why his innings are lower, but he's just so efficient when he's out there. Looking at his baseball savant page, it's probably one of the most beautiful things you can see. 96th percentile in hard hit percentage, 98th percentile in expected ERA, 99th percentile in expected batting average, off speed run value, whiff percentage, and K percentage, and then 100th percentile in. Yes, we're talking about it again. I know I discussed it a lot with Freddie Peralta in the last couple episodes. His extension, 100th percentile in extension. No one in the game does it better than him of pushing off the mound and getting closer to the plate. And again, the closer you are, the easier it is. If you have a major leaguer throwing from a little league, mound distance, it's going to look a lot better than the 60 feet that he throws from in the majors. So will he pitch for the Brewers though? That's my question. I think obviously to start the year, I mean, I have him on the projection. I think he's going to, but I think there is the potential of him getting traded at the trade deadline, depending on how the Brewers are doing. If we're at a spot where it's even questionable whether we're in the race or not, I think we could see him, being traded, a year and a half rental to a team. And I mean, in the late off season, early spring training, the Yankees were showing interest in him. And if they're competing, which they're projected to compete, be very competitive this year with the additions of some of the guys they have, going to the Yankees is something I could see. I think it's honestly a peak time to sell him. He is my favorite player, I would like to say, so I obviously don't want to see him traded. Life isn't a video game. You can't just willy-nilly trade people however you want. There's real people being affected by this. So I think it is for him though a peak time if you are going to sell. It's kind of like with a stock, something that is extremely volatile, and it's at a super high point. I mean, it's hard not to sell. It's kind of a gamble at this point, especially with relievers. And with how many relievers are traded and, moved every year. I mean, I think about how many teams a guy like Aroldis Chapman's pitched for. I think of like David Robertson, Craig Kimbrell, kind of back in the day, Jonathan Papelbon was moving around from teams quite a bit. Guys like that. I mean, look at Josh Hader now in the past 2 years. He's on his third team and probably one of the best, I would say the best left-handed reliever in the game. So obviously a position where guys move a lot. I get that, but I would love to see him extended, but I just don't know sometimes the value on extending relievers like that. And I think there could be a lot more value received in a trade, but I honestly hope they don't do that because Devin Williams is my favorite Brewer. So moving on, let's talk about the studs in the bullpen. I'm gonna take a little sip of this root beer before I start talking about them. All right, so let's start with to me the most exciting guy, and that's Abner Uribe. He is a free agent in 2030, so I mean, tons of team control. He's 23 years old. Last year, he pitched 30 innings, 30 and two-thirds, excuse me, with a 1.76 ERA, a 2.77 FIP, a .6 WAR, and 11.95 K per nine, 5.87 walks per nine. Those numbers both very high. So one is good, one is bad. A 1.17 WHIP, which honestly is probably mostly walks. He needs to really control his walks. Um, Devin Williams tends to be another guy who has some of these issues, but I think he can be better than Devin Williams in the future, as much as that pains me to say, because I love Devin Williams. But Abner Uribe is a stud at being only 23, like I mentioned, a 99th percentile velo, and I think that's coming off his sinker, which averages 99 miles an hour. I think it touched 102. I know Dom Lanphier had mentioned that in our second episode of this podcast with the war draft, in which I got Abner Uribe. So obviously a lot of faith in him from my end. His ZiPS projection for this coming year is 60 innings pitched, a 3.74 ERA, a 4.09 FIP, 2.2 WAR, excuse me, and similar K per nines, or similar per nines in general. So still with that high walk, also with the high strikeout. Again, if he can limit those walks, I think this dude can be untouchable. I mean, having Devin Williams as a guy who you can look up to, learn from, having like a Yoel Payamps, who we'll talk about in a second here, to look up to and learn from. I think there's a lot of potential with this dude, and I think he can become, one of the best relievers in the game, and I think he's already on that trajectory. So I'm super excited to see what he has to do. And personally, a guy who I think can be closer of the future. When Devin Williams inevitably moves on because the Brewers aren't going to pay a reliever as much money as Devin Williams will be commanding. I think he will be the guy that'll step in and be kind of our closer of the future. He'll have plenty of team control and kind of will be the next Devin Williams guy. Moving on, like I said, Yoel Payamps. He's a free agent in 2027, lots of team control. It's kind of going to be the theme with a lot of these guys. So I'll mention their free agent year, but just know all of them are at least, I believe, 2 years of team control left. He is he's going to be probably our more consistent guy out of these three. 2023, he had a 1.2 F WAR, 70 innings pitched, 2.55 ERA, 3.48 WHIP, 77 strikeouts with only 17 walks, 1.04 WHIP. Zips projects him at about a 64 innings workload with a 4.02 ERA and a 4.33 FIP. His velo's been on the rise, which is a consistent thing with Brewers pitching. They typically get guys who, I don't want to say don't throw hard, but maybe aren't touching top level numbers, and they're able to push him up. And I think he went from kind of like a 92 mile an hour fastball, and by the end of the season was touching, I think, like 96, 97, averaging around, I want to say 95. He's throwing a lot harder. Super reliable guy. 21 run value. I mean, that's pretty incredible for a relief pitcher. He limits hard contacts and avoids walks while striking out a decent amount of guys. So, I mean, that's pretty much the total package as a reliever. And if he can keep that going, he's definitely going to be that setup man, that number two guy, as Abner Uribe is kind of figuring out and getting some traction in his time in the big leagues. And now we'll move on to Hobie Milner, free agent in 2026. 2023 season, he was 64.1 innings pitched, 1.82 ERA, a 3.13 FIP, both fantastic numbers. One on the dot for his WAR, 1.82 walks per nine, great. Low home run numbers as well as a .96 WHIP. His ZiPS projects him at 62 innings pitched, 3.88 ERA. Don't think it'll be that high. 4.21 FIP. That's maybe a little more realistic depending on, if his walk numbers go up or maybe even just a little more in the hits department. A 1.22 WHIP. He's the only lefty I included in this bullpen. I just don't think that they have guys in that are left-handed that are ready to necessarily step in. And he's just such a consistent lefty. He's shown that he can handle workloads. He limits walks. His low exit velos. He was 92nd and 91st in those categories respectively. He has an 8 run value in his breaking ball, so obviously not just throwing hard. He doesn't really throw that hard actually at all. So great run value for his breaking balls and 13 run value overall. So obviously a plus run value pitcher is always something you're going to want in your bullpen. A guy who I think will stick with the team the entire season, barring injury. Just a solid lefty, and again, kind of a Yoel Payamps from the left-handed side with just the consistency. Maybe not the strikeout numbers, but definitely low walks, and just a guy who's going to go in. You're going to know what you're going to get from him, and a guy who can contribute when you have a lead late in games. So definitely a guy I'm looking forward to having stay as a Brewer for the next couple of years. Now I'd like to move on to our next category, and that is the potential guys. So potential, I think what I meant by this is that I don't want to say they have a ton of potential for the future, but I think these are guys that potentially can break out this season. Elvis Peguero last season had 61 and a third. By the way, a free agent in 2029, tons of team control. 61 and a third, 3.38 ERA, 3.81 FIP, 128 ERA plus, and a 1.22 WHIP. His ZiPS numbers had him drop down to 50 innings pitched with a 4.26 ERA, 4.27 FIP, .1 WAR, and an 8.81 K per nine. I think he's extremely underrated in the ZiPS projection. Just based on his season last year, I think he's on the up trajectory, so I think he's improving. I project personally more strikeouts just with some of the stuff he has. He has a great sinker, which not only is a ground ball inducing pitch now, but I think that it's kind of becoming a strikeout pitch when you look at guys like Abner Uribe. Peguero throws hard, he gets ground balls, he gets strikeouts, and that's a guy as a reliever, if he can come in and do that for an inning every second or third day, Can't ask for much more. So super excited for Elvis Peguero to make that jump and potentially kind of be a stud along with Payamps, Uribe, and Milner. And same kind of goes for McGill, who I'm a little more excited about personally. He's a free agent in 2028. His 2023 season was much smaller workload compared to these other guys with 34 and two thirds, 3.63 ERA, 2.13 FIP. Nice, very nice number. 1.36 WHIP, 13.5 K per nine. He's got a huge fastball. It's 99th percentile in velocity. Um, Zips has him at 63 innings pitched, 3.47 ERA, 3.39 FIP. Always like to see that FIP lower than the ERA and a 1.2 WAR. I mean, I think that's kind of counting in the strikeouts he's going to get. He's going to be a big strikeout guy. Um, he needs to keep that stuff going and get more innings, and I think that's where that WAR is coming from. And I think he's a guy who's up there with Uribe in terms of potential and what he can be moving forward for this squad. Another guy who could potentially be a future closer, full-time closer. So many dudes with just great potential. And to me, his knuckle curve, that's his, only other pitch besides his fastball, I believe, according to Baseball Savant. If he can really command that pitch well and throw it in opportune situations, I think that'll really be a big determinant of his success. So really excited to see these two guys, and hopefully they both make the opening day roster. And now I'm going to move on to my last category. It's my prove it guys. Not necessarily prove it that you're a good player, but just prove that you should stick with the roster. I think with a position that we have or the guys we have at the relief position, excuse me, I think there's so many guys that I'm going to talk about next that are waiting to come up and pitch, and guys who could be starters that might get their start as a reliever, kind of like a Corbin Burns. Um, Guys that are, ready to throw major league innings, and these two guys are going to have to kind of fight those guys off to keep their innings up at the big leagues. So, Bryce Wilson's 2023 stats. I'd like to preface by saying these are two very different type guys. Bryce Wilson to me is that kind of low leverage situation, whether, you're up big or losing. He's a guy who can come in and really fill up some meaningful innings though, and limit damage when you're down and also hold big leads. So I think those are two very good skills to have, and to me aren't necessarily low leverage, but they're kind of considered more low leverage in the public eye. His 2023 stats again were 76 and two thirds, 2.58 ERA, 4.13 FIP. A little high compared to his ERA, but not terrible, very average. 167 ERA plus with a 1.07 WHIP. His ZiPS projection is 60 innings pitched with 4.34 ERA, 4.65 FIP, and a 1.29 WHIP. So I think that ERA is kind of coming from his higher FIP. He had a great job last year, but again was throwing a lot of innings in low leverage situations. I think that they could potentially try and toss him into a little higher leverage situations when your guys like Uribe, Payamps, even your Pagueros and McGills are, maybe needing a day off, maybe a little sore. Injuries happen as well. So I think he could get tossed into a couple, higher leverage situations, but I think keeping him in this low stakes role, and letting him prove himself there still and just eat up some innings in those situations. He did a great job doing that. So, why fix something if it isn't broken? Keep him in that role. He's doing a great job. He's helping the team win that way. And I mean that's the big goal is as long as the team is winning, as long as he's contributing, keep him up at the big leagues. Moving on to Joe Ross, who I had kind of touched on briefly in the starting pitcher projection. He's a long distance guy, typically a starter, but I think he'll be in the bullpen just because of the lack of major league innings in the past 2 years. I mean, he hasn't thrown a major league inning since 2021. Dealt with a lot of injuries. He's a command-oriented guy, which makes him great for the bullpen, considering that he can, limit walks, limit the hit batsman, which was something he did in his first outing. So maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but in his first outing, um, in spring training, excuse me, I believe, hit a good dude with a pitch and walked a guy. I don't know if it was one or two innings that he threw, but I think he's a dude who can start. So he might be a spot start kind of guy. Could be a dude who fights his way into the rotation. But I think he's also a guy that would be very interesting to mix in with an opener or have, DL Hall start the game. Joe Ross come in after one trip around the order, maybe a trip and a half around the order. To me, he's very low risk. I think you know what you're going to get from him. Um, I think he's kind of low reward as well. I don't think he's gonna have a big breakout season, but he's a dude who can come in, has some experience. I think he can fill up some valuable innings for a rotation that might need it this year, with our number two being an aging veteran left-hander, and our three through five being pretty open right now, honestly, and with guys who need experience or guys who are really looking to prove themselves. So I think that he can play many different roles with this team. He can wear a lot of different hats, and I'm excited to see how they use him. So I'm really hoping for a bounce back season from Joe Ross, and hopefully he can just help the Brewers get some wins. That's what it's about. I'm gonna take another sip of my root beer here, not forget about this. All right, last little segment we're gonna talk about here is the call up replacement guys. I think these are dudes who, I don't want to say replacement as in they're replacement level players. I just think this is an extremely competitive position group. And these are dudes who either need to come in and get innings or can be waiting to pounce on opportunities where maybe the guys we have relieving aren't performing to expectations. The first guy I want to mention is a lefty. He's, I want to say, the ninth left-handed pitching prospect according to Prospect Pipeline. I think that's where he sits. So a top 10 left-handed pitching prospect. For me, he just needs to get more of that major league experience. He doesn't have a major league inning thrown. So if he can come up, pitch some bullpen before he's thrown into a starting position, um, I think that'd be great. So that's kind of why I threw him on here, is just to get him some experience. I think he's going to spend most of his time in AAA, refining, keeping those strikeout numbers high and limiting hits and walks more, and just getting the more innings on his arm, more experience. Tiago Vieira, he's a veteran guy, replacement level last year at .1 WAR. So if you don't know, zero, excuse me, is the replacement level number. So he was very close to that. I think he's a dude who can step in though and fill in for somebody who's maybe struggling, or if there's an injury, he's definitely a guy who they know what they're going to get from him. Aaron Ashby is very interesting, another lefty, a guy who can be a starter as well. But we're already invested in him. 5 years, 20 million. I think the AAV ended up being around 4.1 million. I think he's in the fourth year maybe of that contract. Super, super excited about him potentially getting back on track. I think he's a dude who can start and kind of do the same thing as Joe Ross, where he's potentially, they're pitching an opener, or maybe Colin Ray starts the game, goes through the order one time, and then they throw out an Aaron Ashby to fill up at least, one more trip around the order. The next guy, JB Bukowskis, to me, he's the most electric guy on this list. Despite having Robert Gasser on here, I'd say he's the most electric right-hander. Very high potential, throws super hard, having a good spring from what I believe so far. He's a dude who it was really hard for me not to add to the list. It was kind of him, Bryce Wilson, Elvis Peguero were all, in my opinion, kind of in the same boat. I compare Bukowskis a lot to like a McGill. I think they're kind of similar pitchers, and I'd really, I really do believe that he will be throwing a major league inning before June 1st. I think he'll be up pretty quick, whether it's due to injury or due to just wanting to get him experience, or maybe a guy's, like I said, not reaching the expectations they have for this bullpen. He's only 27. Believe still a lot of team control. Don't quote me on that though. Um, the next guy is Taylor Clark. Um, Projected on Fangraphs to make the team. He was on the Royals last year. Didn't look much into him. He didn't seem to be having a great season last year, and I don't believe the year before either. So I personally just think he'll kind of be a guy at AAA, waiting in the wings to step in if he needs to. The last guy I had here was Jansen Junk. He can start, but he needs more innings. Need to see what he's got. I believe a former Angel, and I think he's kind of a prove it guy as well. 28 years old, got a lot of time left to as a reliever. I mean, they can pitch for a while, so I think he's a dude again who can start though. Just really excited to see what he brings to the table and let, him get some more major league innings. I thought he threw a little at the end of last year and looked decent, but I think just more consistency from him is what they'd need to see. I'm sure at AAA he'll get a solid amount of innings, so excited to see what he's able to do with that. All right, let's talk about the Brewers trivia. So last episode, we talked about CC Sabathia and in his brief time with the Brewers, half a season. He had 17 starts, and how many of those starts were complete games? And the answer was C, 7. That's pretty crazy now, especially nowadays. Not many guys are, even going past 6 innings really. So to think that he was throwing almost half of his starts, going the full 9 innings or even more was pretty incredible. So let's talk about this episode's Brewers trivia. We had Dan Plesac is the Brewers' career leader in saves with 133 during his time in Milwaukee. What Brewer reliever is next with 125 career saves? Is that A, Francisco Rodriguez, B, Raleigh Fingers, C, John Axford, or D, Josh Hader? You can reach out on Spotify or YouTube at Base Paths and Brewskis, reach out on X at Base and Brewski, or Instagram and TikTok at Base Paths and Brewskis with your response to this trivia question. I'd like to hear what you have to say. This was an interesting one to me, so I'm excited to see what your guys' answers are. With that, we have our B&B beer requests. If you have any beers you've been dying to try, have a go-to beer that I need to try, comment or reach out on any of the social medias listed below with what I should drink next. Just a reminder, I will only be doing non-alcoholic until Easter. So if you have any non-alcoholics you've been wanting to try, or if you've found one that's interesting and good, I'm excited to hear it because I don't have much experience with them. So yeah, thank you for listening today. I'm gonna take my last drink here of the root beer. And with that, the beer is gone and the pod is done. Have a good one, guys. Thanks for listening.